We are in the golden age of documentary filmmaking, and this is due in large part to the camera and lens technologies that have recently been made available to us. We wanted to better understand the many lens options and how they impact the look and feel of a project. In the Behind the Lens series, we test 11 zooms to see not only how they perform technically, but also how they handle when shooting with them. We created a variety of documentary shooting environments and ran the lenses through one by one. Be sure to tune in to this 11-part series as we go in-depth with documentary zooms.
Sorry. Awkward transition. There we go. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Thank you, Matt, for joining us. So
Absolutely.
That was a little teaser on the Behind the Lens series with cinematographer Matt Porwoll. If you guys haven't seen it, we've released the first video already, the first blog post as well, on the Fujinon MK series lens. So it'll be an 11-part series.
Yep, so we looked at 11 different zooms.
Yep, and we'll be releasing them about every 2 weeks, which is great. And as you saw from the teaser, it's not meant to be a technical scientific test. There's enough of that information out there on the internet from the various manufacturers. We feel like it's probably best to do this more from a perspective of a working cinematographer. So before we start, Matt, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, please.
Sure. So my name is Matt Porwoll, and I'm a documentary cinematographer. Funny enough, my first job in New York was at AbelCine, and so this is where I got my start. And then, I was a camera assistant in New York for about 10 years, and then have been shooting since then. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
So by the way, he's very humble about this description of Emmy Award-winning Matt Porwoll for Cartel Land. Humility is also one of his strong suits. But so as a cinematographer, when you conceived this idea of this test, what was the inspiration for that?
So I think, especially working in documentaries, I feel like it's easy to get pigeonholed in what gear you're going to use. And I think you also, on the initial decision of what you're going to use, you get bogged down by either this is what I just have always used, and so I'll keep using it, or this is what I can afford to use, and so that's what I'm going to go with. But we're now at a point that we have so much incredible equipment available to us. We have so much equipment that's available to us that is inexpensive, that either we can afford ourselves or we're able to rent for a project. And so, I've worked with a lot of most of these lenses that are in the test over the years, but I've always worked with them, this lens here, then 3 years later I would pick it up again, and I never really got to have them all in one place. And so I said, well, why don't we kind of move away from this idea of this is the lens that I own, so this is the lens I'm going to use for every project, and start to think about what are the advantages of certain lenses, where do they shine, and how can they fit in and help better the product that I'm doing. And so I wanted to just lay them all out there, and that's kind of how this started.
Sure. So for those of you that are not familiar, you had several criteria before you went into this. Can you describe some of those?
Yeah. So there's a lot of lenses on the market, and so you kind of have to narrow it down a little bit. And since I shoot documentaries, for most of the time I'm not using prime lenses, and so I kind of eliminated that from the list so we can stay a little bit focused. And then, when it comes to zoom lenses, we've got a few different varietals of that we can use. So if we're doing, a higher end project, you've got some really beautiful glass that also weighs 20 pounds. Probably not going to be hand holding those lenses. So the first set of criteria was weight. So it needed to be 6.5 pounds or less, something that I could shoot with, for most of the day and not kill myself. Another thing is the zoom range. We started it at a 3x, and so it needs to be something that either I can live on that one lens all day and not have to switch it out, or it's part of a pair that I can carry 2 lenses with me and have a focal length coverage that will pretty much get me through the day.
Okay.
And then the last one is kind of an anti-criteria, is that price did not play a factor in this. And so I wanted to look at lenses, basically the price range that we're looking at in this goes from, I think, $800 to like $40,000. And so again, it's not about, this is the lens that I want to buy. It's, I can own this lens if it makes sense. I can rent this lens if it makes sense. Let's just kind of remove that part from from the criteria of why we're going to choose it, and let's look at the creative aspects.
Right, and that's important too, I think, is that you really wanted to focus on the look of the lens, and maybe on a, would you say, project-to-project basis, you would make that determination now that you've done this test?
Yeah, I mean, the point of it was really the genesis of this was I want to know about these lenses. I didn't do this to sell lenses. I didn't do this to for any of that. It's just I'm a cinematographer and I want to know what does that lens look like and how can it help me do what I need to do. And so so it really just started with that. It's easy for me to look up the technical specifications of a lens. It's easy for me to do that, but to really shoot with it and feel how it operates and line all these lenses up together, not to pit them against each other per se, but to just say, this is where this fits and this is where that fits. And I now have an inventory of all of this footage that not only I can reference, but it's easier for me to take to producers and say, this is what it looks like. And so if we do have to go and rent this lens, here's what it's giving us and here are the advantages to it.
Great. And actually you said, and I have a quote from you here that I'll read. It says, as storytellers, our job is to go in and not have any preconceived notions of what the story is until we understand it for ourselves. Would you say that you approached this Lens series with the same thought process?
Yeah, I mean, initially I'm not putting lenses on this category because it's something that I've heard is great and is supposed to be an awesome lens. This is, as far as I know, every lens that fits these criteria. They're all in there. Right. And so, again, if I haven't shot with it, I want to put it through its paces and I want to understand how it works. And I don't want to come into it saying, well, I know this one's going to be beautiful, so I'm either not going to test it or I'm going to test it in a way that really makes it look beautiful. I just want to, level playing field and just see what they do.
So you had to divorce yourself from the whole price argument then, would you say?
To a certain point. I mean, at the other thing, it was just really fun to be able to get all of these lenses and play with them. Some of them I use regularly, some of them I don't. Some of them are brand new, and so I didn't, this is the first time that a lot of us had even kind of shot with these lenses, and so that part was exciting to just get them all in there.
Yeah, I guess we were lucky in some ways that you had some time off before NAB.
It's perfect timing.
That we could actually run this test with some lenses that we knew were coming down the pipeline. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a great timing, to your point.
Yeah.
So were there any surprises? Was there any lens that you really blew you away? I don't mean pick a favorite. I just mean in general. Was there anything that you're like, wow, I did not expect this lens to have that characteristic?
I think what surprised me is, while we're talking about kind of divorcing ourselves from the preconceived notion of a lens, what did surprise me is that I figured an $800 lens was going to look like crap and a $40,000 lens was going to be like pure gold on screen. And I think what surprised me the most is that, if you really did just line all of these lenses up back to back and didn't say what was what, they're all amazing. And so I think that was the most surprising. And so it actually kind of helped get to the point of the test for me in that I don't have to dismiss something because it's not sharp. They're all incredibly sharp. Even DSLR lenses are designed to shoot stills that are higher than 4K, so they're going to look good, even if they're not expensive. We're kind of beyond that. So it removed all of that stuff of I'm going to take this lens out purely because it doesn't look good. And now I get to just focus on, is it warm? Is it cool? How does it flare? Is it lower contrast, higher contrast? All of these things that don't make it better or worse. It just makes it, a good fit for a particular project.
Right, so different characters.
Yeah.
What would you say? Yeah. So going out, you said all these criteria. Would you say that now that we've concluded shooting the tests anyway, did you accomplish all of your goals? Did you get everything you wanted to get done?
I think so. I mean, I could take all of these lenses and shoot with them for a long time, but didn't have that ability. But I think, for the most part, I was able to test all of the elements that I wanted to look at. I think something that I kind of mentioned in the intro post to this whole setup is that lens tests in general are inherently a subjective test. There's no way that I can do a test that answers every question and concern that everyone out there is going to have about a lens. And so, I kind of had to build the test criteria on something that I want to know. How does it handle? What does it feel like when I'm shooting with it? Is it sharp? Is it,
Right.
all of these things? And so there's a lot more that I probably could have tested for. But at the end of the day, it's it's really for me to know how I want to use this thing, and hopefully that correlates with what a lot of other people want to know.
Sure, and again, just sort of to reiterate, the things you tested were contrast, bokeh, flaring, right? Skin tone, right?
Breathing, minimum focus, edge brightness, kind of finding the sweet spot of the lens for its aperture, resolution, just to know if it's sharp or if it has kind of some fall off to it.
Right.
Yeah,
right. And none of that dictates a worse or better lens, right? It's just a different lens.
Exactly. I mean, there's and not even to really get into names on them per se, but even with like prime lenses, for instance, there's the same gradient of cost and access, and so even on some cheaper like cinema prime lenses, there's elements where wide open it's going to be kind of soft and it like falls off on the edges. But I like how that looks. It may not be the look that I want for everything, but the fact that I know that this lens will do that is great, because then when the time comes that's what I want to use, I know that I can pick it up and do it. So, it's really just about finding what do these lenses look like and where would I put them to best use.
So did you pull from your shooting experience with all the various projects you've worked on? Did you pull these criteria from those experiences? Like when you're shooting somewhere in the Mexican and Texas border, for example, and you're thinking about a certain scene or a certain element that you shot that you wish you had something different? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, going back to the fact that all of these lenses are really great quality, what I ended up finding myself focusing more on, which I think was another surprise to me, was less about how does it look, because once I figured out which lenses were warm, which lenses were cool and had higher and lower contrast, then what I kind of fixated myself on is the build of the lens and the quality of the tactile feeling of it. And so how smooth is the dampening on the focus ring? How far is the focus throw? And is it going to be, in some ways 300 degrees is awesome, but in other ways it's like when I'm trying to go from minimum focus to infinity, if I have to keep racking around, that can be difficult, but it is really precise. And so, if I'm using, say, the Canon 15.5 to 47 and 30 to 105 as a set, the fact that all of the lens gears are matched, and so if I switch lenses from one to the next and I'm using a follow focus, then it's going to fit. Little things like that make a big difference in how you're shooting with them. Are they parfocal? Do they drift when you zoom? All of these aspects, in a way, especially for documentary shooting, are sometimes more important than how they look, because if it inhibits how I can operate, then it's working against me. If I know its limitations stylistically and creatively, then I can work around that. But if I get caught up on some of the ergonomics, then that can be a problem.
Yeah, that's a good point that I really didn't think of until you mentioned it, is that we think about the way the lens... Oh, that's weird. Hang on. We think about how the lens looks, but we don't necessarily think about how it operates. At least I didn't until you just mentioned it, because obviously when you're out there and running around, you have to think about, can I get the shot?
Right.
Regardless of what it looks like, did I get it?
Right.
So one really cool element that I really liked what you guys did was you stuck a GoPro right alongside the lens barrel, so you could see your movements as you're trying to focus between the various subjects. So kudos to that, by the way, because I think that was pretty cool.
Which I know I'm going to hear a lot about, because I always try to fight producers on using GoPros in my show. In fact, that guy knows it really well. But it was funny as I brought it out, I was like, maybe I'm just going to see what this looks like. And it really gave us a new window into this lens test. And so it's opened my eyes about GoPros to a point.
So will this change? And what's next for you in terms of your projects? Will this change how you approach a project that you've already been cooking, or do you think you're still going to full steam ahead to whatever those projects may be?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think especially on the development of projects, especially with documentaries now, there is now an expectation that they look good and they feel like a movie. We're kind of beyond the stage of all documentaries falling into this kind of educational, dry world, which is great for us as cinematographers. And so that conversation does get to happen at the beginning of what do we want this to look like, where is it going, what are the technical aspects that we need to consider, as well as just the look and feel of the film or of the show. So this definitely helped inform me on those conversations. And it's fun because with documentaries I'll jump around and I'll do something where, like for instance with Cartel Land, I need a small body and I just need lenses and everything that I can carry on me, either in a waist belt or a backpack, all day or days. And so, while having a really nice, beautiful cinema zoom would be awesome, it's inhibiting, and I can't do that on certain projects. Where there's other films where, I'm going out and I've got 3 camera bodies, and we're shooting on primes and we're shooting on cinema zooms, and it just has this look and feel to it. And so it's nice to be able to know what the spectrum is and what's available to me and how to best use them.
So this goes outside a little bit of what the scope of the project was, but you brought up resolution earlier when you shot the test chart to confirm. As the industry evolves, documentaries are going to have much higher production quality, right, where we expect them to look like movies. Television looks like movies now.
Right. Documentaries
also are looking like movies. Would you argue or argue against resolution being really, really important? Or are you the cinematographer that prefers sort of a softer look? It's kind of a double-edged sword.
So now are we moving out of lenses and into
resolution? Lenses go into it as well.
Sure.
I'm not talking resolution like camera resolution, like 4K or...
Yeah, I mean, I think...
Resolving power of the lens is probably a better way.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, we certainly see that as we get into lenses across the board that are incredibly sharp, now we're going back to... putting filtration, or at least talking about putting filtration on, especially for interviews, or which lenses. I might shoot my verite footage with one set of lenses because it's really sharp, and if I happen to slightly misfocus or something like that, it can kind of help compensate for that. But then if I'm sitting down and doing a sit-down interview with somebody, I may not want to choose the sharpest lens. It may not be the best choice. And so again, kind of knowing what's available to us can help make those decisions. And so it's really, again, to keep reiterating, it really is just about kind of finding the right tool for the right project.
Right, and that's great.
There's no one fit for everything.
Right, I think that's important too, is that we have to remind everyone that there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all. That's why there's so many cameras and lenses here at a trade show like this, and they're all equally good, just depending what your goals are.
Exactly. I mean, again, like on Cartel Land, you would, on any project, you would think, oh, a $40,000 lens must be the best, and I will use it for everything. But I can tell you right now, I never, in my wildest dreams, would have made that decision on that film. There's no way.
Right. Yeah, you've often said that your staple lens is the Canon 17-55.
Right, and it's the cheapest lens on the test.
Right.
Yeah.
And primary reasons, would you say that's your primary lens? Are
it's the perfect focal length. That 17-55 is can really cover you for verite. It's image stabilized, which is great. It weighs nothing. It is sharp.
Sure.
Again, as long as I know what the limitations of it are, I know that I probably don't want to shoot in pouring rain with it. I probably don't want to be, although Cartel Land was I don't want to be in dusty situations because it's not weather sealed. As long as I know that stuff, then I can work around it. But, for a lens that you can throw in your pocket literally and then take out and put on the camera is amazing.
Right, and that's great. Any other thoughts when you sort of concluded the test? Anything else jump out at you that you hadn't thought of earlier?
I don't know. I mean, again, yeah, I was pleasantly surprised across the board, and I think to just be able to see the intricacies of, wow, okay, this lens is warm, but it's not too warm, or it's neutral, but it's it really just helps embrace skin tones and skin tones alone, and everything else stays pretty consistent and neutral. I mean, those little things are things that I've never really been able to look at from lens to lens to lens. I can see it as I'm shooting with a lens on a film, but until I get to compare it against other things, that was really enlightening on this test.
So how important is the lens? This is going to sound like a silly question, but how important is the lens to the whole process now that we have cameras that capture all the dynamic range in the world and all the contrast that we want? How important is that to you when you start a project?
Oh, incredibly. I mean, and I think that kind of in a way goes back to the ergonomics too, because the lens is actually what you're holding. You're not holding the camera. The camera sits on your shoulder, but you're holding and you're interfacing and composing with the lens. And so if it doesn't feel right, if it doesn't balance well, if it doesn't interface with the types of accessories that you need, that can be a problem. Where the camera, we can work around that and make it bigger or smaller or choose a different camera. But the lens really does influence how you hold the camera and compose, as well as what it looks like.
More so than, because in the grading process, in a grading suite, you can make the footage look almost like whatever you want.
You can make it look like whatever you want.
Right.
Sure.
So then, but the lens, you're saying the ergonomics part of it is more important than that.
Is as important. I mean, there's also the argument to be said that sure, we can go in and we can make anything look warmer, or we can make it look cooler, but if you want it to look cooler, maybe just choose a lens that's cooler. Right. It can help you in the back end as well.
Right. So start with what you want.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So how important are the features that you mentioned? Image stabilizer. You also mentioned servos. How important are those to you, generally speaking? Or again, is that sort of dependent on?
I think it's dependent. There's having an image stabilized lens on a smaller, lightweight lens, I think, is important. Whereas if you have a heavier lens, it's not as important, because that weight can kind of act as your image stabilizer. So if you're shooting with, say, the Canon 17-120, it's got some weight to it, but when it's sitting on your shoulder, you can really move smoothly with it. Whereas the 17-55 that weighs nothing, you're going to see every little bump and jitter. And so, for instance, that's why I choose the 17-55 over, say, the 16-35, because it's image stabilized and it has a longer range. But it's things like that are important. Having options like the 18-80, the Sony 18-110, that are these hybrid lenses that are cinema style, where they're geared, they're manual, but they also have the ability to click in and have a servo. They have image stabilizer. They can interface with autofocus. Those are important elements to consider with how you're going to use the lens as well.
Right.
So
generally speaking, how do you operate? Are you the kind of put on your shoulder type of operator, or do you prefer to keep it up front and on your chest?
I'm either on my shoulder, or I wear a waist belt. And so, a lot of times, especially if you're shooting people sitting down and having dinner, or they're sitting on the couch or something like that, being able to just plop the camera down onto my waist belt and use that to operate off of. Although ultimately you end up somewhere in the middle, so you end up cradling. But I prefer to, instead of holding it out and keeping it small, I like to build it up, have a little bit more weight, especially if I'm working with some of these, bigger cinema zooms, then, having a bigger camera with, a battery on the back and things like that balance it out. Right. But I find that it's more of an extension of me if it's on me, as opposed to sitting out in front.
So you think the footage looks more natural, perhaps? Or?
I think so. Okay. Yeah, and it matches eye line, that kind of stuff. But I think you can react a lot better if it's just, if I want to look over there, then I will pan my body over, and that's where the camera's going. So it's a little bit more intuitive.
Right. So if you could design the ultimate dream lens, ignoring physics for a second, right? Because there's obviously some reasons that we can't do a 22 by zoom lens. If you could design your perfect zoom lens, what would that look like?
It's tough. That's a really tough question, because again, on some things I would want a lens that's this big, and on some things I would want a lens that's that big.
Okay. So even if you could get the perfect focal length in the lens this big, it may not be perfect for you. You'd want it to be physically larger.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we would all love to have fast lenses that have a great zoom range, but I really feel that and I think it kind of shows in the lenses that are in the test, that something from 17 or 18 millimeters to, say, 100 to 120, for 99% of the stuff that you're shooting, that's going to cover you. You can always go to, a 70 to 200 or something like that, right. 30 to 300 with the Canon if you want something longer, but that's like a specialty, you're going to pick it up for a shot. So, that focal length and something that sits in a 2.8. Other than that, it all depends on how you want it to feel.
Right. Well, that's interesting, because I sort of assumed when you ask most people, they would say, 22 by zoom range, that's a f1.4, that's waterproof and dustproof and can float and autofocus and all this other stuff. But you're still going back to operation. That's the most critical part of it for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because I also think, it's really great to have, a lens that will cover you on every focal length imaginable. and you don't have to switch it out. But there's also something that's nice. It's kind of the same, in a way, it's a little bit like the mentality of shooting with primes, right? Where I know what a 35 looks like. I know what that focal length feels like, whether I want to, how far away from the subject I generally want to be. And so it informs the way that you cover a scene if you're just going to shoot it on a prime. And I can, take a step in if I want to zoom. And so those, understanding the focal length is important, so that if you go and you have something like a 17 to 55, I know that those are the focal lengths I have, and this is what I'm going to get out of it. If I had something where I can just stand here and I can get a wide shot and I can punch in and see the words all the way down there, then you're not being as creative and you're not thinking about your shots. You just can physically do it. And so I think, in a way, having a restricted focal length range makes you think more about what it is that you're going to shoot and how you're going to cover it. Of course, there's logistical implications of that, and having to switch lenses or having to have an assistant or things like that. But I think all of these limitations, in a way, end up giving you a better product, because you have to think more, you have to make decisions beforehand. What am I going to carry with me? And if you don't have it, you don't have it, and you creatively make do.
I'm happy you said that, because in the world of where we shoot everything and just roll on it and we'll cut it and fix it in post mentality, I'm happy that you're taking that extra step still and thinking about it ahead of time. So.
Yeah, and I think it's something that in a lot of ways is just, it inherently happens given the options of lenses that you have as well. I'm not saying that if you have an incredible focal length range that you're going to lose all creativity out of it. But I think, just especially with documentaries, it's, every film that you're on, you're going to have limitations, whether it's budgetary, equipment, crew, lighting, whatever it is. There's things that you're just going to have to sort out with what you have, and I think it just makes you that much more engaged in what you're doing. And so it's frustrating at the time, but in retrospect, you actually are thankful for it.
Right, a better product, would you say, at the end of it? Right. I did want to spend a little bit of time, or open up some time at the end for any questions from our audience here. So if anyone has any questions, we'll have a microphone set up. Or if you just want to shout it out, I'll repeat it for the live stream reasons. But did anyone have any questions before we continue on? No? All right, good talk. No. Okay, if there's no other questions from the audience, I guess your favorite focal length, do you have one? I have an answer for this for myself personally. So I always ask all the DPs I speak to.
Interesting. I would have to say that it's either a 25 or a 35.
Okay, that's interesting. Again, it has nothing to do with this lens test. It's more of a sort of insight on Matt Porwoll's mind.
Yeah, I like having. I tend to find myself shooting wide more often, and then I have to kind of remind myself to punch in, or I'm always really close and tight with people, and so you can get a really beautiful close up on a 35, right, and then be able to take a few steps back and get that wide. So I tend to like the wider focal lengths.
Great. Any other points?
Yeah.
Sorry, what a question?
Did you have some
I'm sorry. Yes. So just to repeat it, Cartel Land, what was your lens of choice?
Well, we only had two, so it was a 17 to 55 and 24 to 105. I would say the 17 to 55. I found myself on the EF, the Canon EFS lens. Yeah.
And we had another question, I think, gentleman in the front, or? So what are some of your, I guess, aspirations? Folks
influences.
That you... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of cinematographers, at least on the narrative side, that shoot more kind of natural. So, obviously Roger Deakins and people of that category. I tend to like less stylized things. And I think, just watching narrative films that feel like reality in a way kind of informs and helps figure out how would I cover and shoot a doc. And then on the documentary side, it's a long list. It's a tough list, but yeah.
Right. Any other questions? So when you were shooting, just going back to Cartel Land for a little bit, you chose those two lenses out of necessity or because of where you were, or?
Yeah, mostly out of necessity. I mean, we were shooting on the C300,
Right.
and so we knew it needed to be EF lenses, so we went, kind of with the natural set to go with that, but again, they're image stabilized. We shot the majority of the film at an f4 anyway, and so, even with the 17 to 55, we were generally stopping down to a 4, unless we needed the light at night. And we had those two lenses, and I did have a 70 to 200, with a doubler for moon shots and things like that, but, that came out once in a blue moon.
Yeah, no pun intended.
No pun intended. So, yeah, I mean, it just, that focal length range worked, and I think the other aspect of it is that both the director and I were shooting simultaneously for the majority of the film, and so what we would end up doing is one of us would take one lens and the other would take the other, and so that way, if I had the 17 to 55, then I could get the wide coverage, I can get the groupings, and then, the director would be on the 24 to 105 and could get close-ups, could get inserts, things like that, or vice versa. So having those two ranges kind of fit for the type of coverage that you needed to get.
So was the f4 an aesthetic decision that you shot that way?
It was, yeah. I mean, at certain times I really like the look of a wide-angle lens at like a 2.8 or less. But in other ways, it's not at all realistic. I mean, just the fall off and things like that can be, in a way, distracting, even though it tends to focus you more on what it is you want to look at. But I feel that, for documentary, you tend to want to feel what's happening in the full scene. It's not just about one aspect. And so the f4 to me is a really sweet spot to shoot, where you can have selective focus, you can separate your foreground from your background, but you're not losing your background, and it's still an integral part of the scene.
Great. Any other questions I thought I saw a hand up out of the corner of my eye, but it may have just been someone walking by. Yeah, go ahead. So just to paraphrase a little bit, the question was, in a doc scenario, how do you prep for a shoot like that? Was that?
Yeah. Well, I think at a broad level, if we're going in, say, like with Cartel Land, we knew that it was just going to be small crews. We knew that we were going into situations that were either going to be, I guess, going into it, prepping. We didn't know that they were going to be dangerous. That happened later. But we knew that we were going to be going out on multi-day long hikes in Arizona, so we need small, tight camera packages. We're going to be bouncing around the back of cars. You can start to picture what those scenes are going to look like. Whereas other films, it might be more interview driven. It might be you're shooting in people's houses. You can take the time to rig up a car mount. You can take the time to have a separate body that you use inside of a car versus, so you have a pretty good sense of how you're able to go into a scene or what those scenes are going to be. So that can help inform the gear that you choose.
Great. All right. Oh, one more question. Yeah.
Yeah, it was I would say 90% handheld. We did have in Arizona we did have a glide cam that we shot, again kind of feeling like at some point thinking that we were doing a lot of hiking with our character, that a lot of bouncing is going to be nauseating. So we did do some of that, but that was pretty selective again, where all of the verite was all shot handheld. Yeah. I mean, I even find myself when it's time to go out and grab an exterior or something, I kind of forget to take the tripod with me, and I'm like, I just do it handheld.
So the question was, do you prefer handheld?
But I definitely prefer handheld. Right. Yeah.
Great. So I don't have any more questions really. I don't know if you have any last thoughts to share, little nuggets of wisdom.
Yeah. No. I mean, the only thing is, I hope that I did this lens test, and initially for me, but I really wanted to try to do it to answer a lot of questions that people have had, either things that I've talked with other cinematographers about, or people that I would imagine would be in similar situations to me. So I hope that this is something that you find useful, and you're able to take this footage and stockpile it and help have conversations with producers and with your director, and just help better inform how you want to translate what's in your head and what's happening in front of you to a creative image.
Yeah, so again, we'll have the rest of the videos coming online as the weeks move on, as you really have time to finish cutting them. First one's online already on the Fujinon MK series.
Yep.
So it's a great resource. We really thank you for putting it all together. It's been a ton of work on your part, but I think it'll pay off. I think not just for yourself, but I think for everyone out there.
Absolutely.
So I think
it's good to start the conversation with the community at large.
Yeah. So I think as I say, I think the industry as a whole does owe you a round of applause and our gratitude. So Matt Porwoll, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you guys. And thank you guys. Cool. Awesome. Thank you.